So. So. Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Wir müssen erst noch ein bisschen improvisieren. Und zwar, bitte setzen Sie sich, Mladen Dolar. Das wird ein Abend auf Deutsch und auf Englisch. Diejenigen, die kein Englisch können, mögen bitte an einem Übersetzertisch da hinten rechts Platz nehmen. Urban Schrimpf vom Jacques ist so freundlich, er ist auch Schüler von Mladen Dolar, seinen Statement, seine Antworten ins Deutsche resümierend simultan zu übersetzen. Wir wollten eigentlich noch auf die Botschafterin und den Botschafter warten, aber wir fangen jetzt trotzdem schon an. Die wichtigsten Präliminarien sind dann erledigt. Die Diskussion wird etwa 75 Minuten dauern. Danach sind Sie gebeten, Ihre Fragen, Ihre Diskussionsbeiträge einzubringen. Wir haben dafür ein extra Mikro, das werden wir rumreichen. Ja, dann würde ich sagen, wenn Sie bereit sind, wenn die Technik bereit ist, Markus oben gibt ein Zeichen, ich kann ihn zwar nicht sehen, es läuft.
Es ist okay.
Wir sind live auf YouTube, Sie können aber auch die Diskussion nachhören auf dem YouTube-Kanal von der Romanfabrik und auch mit freundlicher Unterstützung des Goethe-Instituts in Ljubljana. Weiterhin werden wir unterstützt vom JAG, von diesem Verband, der auch die Buchmesse organisiert. Urban Schrimpf ist hier der Vertreter, hier anwesend. Und ja, ich freue mich besonders, heute Abend Mladen Dolar begrüßen zu dürfen. Aus meiner Sicht einer der interessantesten und auch bedeutendsten Philosophen der Gegenwart in Europa. Mladen Dolar wurde 1951 in Maribor geboren. Sein Studium der Philosophie und des Französischen schloss er 1978 an der Universität von Ljubljana ab. Danach studierte er in Paris in Paris und an der University of Westminster. Er wurde Philosophieprofessor an der Universität von Ljubljana, erhielt viele Gastprofessoren und gründete zusammen mit Slavoj Zizek und anderen die Gesellschaft für Theorie der Psychoanalyse, kurz auch Ljubljana School genannt. Ihr Ziel ist es, die Psychoanalyse von Jacques Lacan mit der Philosophie des deutschen Idealismus zu verbinden und damit zu begründen. Ein gewagtes Unternehmen, Hegel soll Lacan erklären. Insbesondere mit der Dialektik von Hegel, dem Mladen Dolar durch sein Buch His Master's Voice in 6 Sprachen übersetzt gewidmet hat. Lacan plus Hegel ist gleich Dolar? Fragezeichen. Nein, so einfach geht die Rechnung nicht auf, denn Mladen Dolar hat sich durch so viele Philosophen und Schriftsteller, durch Filme inspirieren lassen. Ja, er ist auch Filmkritiker und auch Musiker, dass es Wochen dauern würde, um sein Werk einigermaßen gerecht vorzustellen. Und dann will Mladen Dolar gar nicht, dass die Rechnung aufgeht. Es bleibt immer ein Rest und genau um diesen Rest kümmert er sich besonders. Um das Nicht-Identische, um die Risse in der Welt, um die Spaltungen und Spalten im Sein. Und vor kurzem hat er auch ein Werk, ein Heft über die Gerüchte publiziert. Und da sind wir besonders dankbar. Eine große Überraschung. Heute Abend ist dieser Band auch auf Deutsch erschienen. Axel Dielmann Verlag, Axel Dielmann, der auch anwesend ist. Und in diesem Vortrag und Essay über Gerüchte entwickelt auch Mladen Dolar diese Phänomene, die zu wenig beachtet werden, die nicht philosophisch eigentlich betrachtet werden. Gerüchte liegt unterhalb der Doxa, also ist keine Meinung, und schon gar kein Episteme, schon gar kein Erkenntnis, worum sich die Philosophie eigentlich kümmert, um Wahrheit. Aber eben Mladen Dolar findet, dass man sich genau um diese Gerüchte, um den Schatten des Logos, wie er sagt, kümmern muss. Und er hat es getan eben in diesem Band. Und wir wissen alle, dass die Gerüchte gerade im Zeitalter der sozialen Medien, Beispiel Trump, eine Macht ausüben, die wir unbedingt auch reflektieren müssen. Sein Denken dreht sich um das Negative und die Negation, die nach Hegel erst für die Dynamik sorgt. Oder mit Goethes Faust zu sprechen, ich bin der Geist, der stets verneint, und das mit Recht, alles was entsteht, ist wert, dass es zugrunde geht. Er kümmert sich, Mladen Dolar, also um das Abweichen, er nennt es mit einem lateinischen Begriff Glinamen, das angeblich Bedeutungslose wie das Husten, Brabbeln, Schreien, Lachen, Singen, den Schluck auf, dessen grundlegende Bedeutung er erschließt. Eben, was die Stimme erst ausmacht, diese signifikanten, also Klangformen, gehen dem Signifikaten voraus in der Terminologie von Saussure und von Lacan. Dessen Maxime lautete ne pas céder sur le désir. Wenn Menschen von ihrem Begehren ablassen, geben sie die Vernunft auf, fährt Dolar Lacan weiter. Die Vernunft muss die Kräfte des Abgrunds in Dienst nehmen, um gehört zu werden. Aus diesen Maximen entwickelt Mladen Dolar eine subversive Ethik des Begehrens und Aufbegehrens. Wichtiger Punkt, wichtiges Moment in der Entwicklung von Mladen Dolar, der Französisch auch studiert hat, waren seine Begegnungen in Frankreich. Für sie war und bleibt Paris ein Schlüssel. Welche Erfahrungen haben Sie in Paris gemacht? Wie haben Sie dort gelebt? Was waren Ihre wichtigsten Eindrücke?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you so much for this invitation. It's a great honor to be here. And I apologize for speaking English. I will speak English as is the general fate nowadays. Die Lingua Franca. Ich muss mich entschuldigen, mein Deutsch ist nicht gut genug für öffentlichen Gebrauch. Ich habe Deutsch auf der Universität gelernt, um Hegel und Kant und Freud und solche Leute lesen zu können. Und das kann ich. Aber für ein solches Gespräch taugt es nicht. So I will stick to English. I'm really sorry about that. Yes, you were asking about the experience of Paris. And you know, there's Walter Benjamin has written a piece called Paris, la capitale du 19e siècle, the capital of the 19th century. And I think there was a whole generation of us starting our intellectual development in the late 60s and then the 70s. For us was also Paris, the capital of the second half of the 20th century. And I will tell two stories of my encounter with Paris. And the first time I came to Paris, I was a very young lad in 1969, in June 1969, I think. And this was a year after the May 68 revolution. I missed the revolution by 1 year. But Paris was still covered with graffiti all over, so the spirit was still there. And so I was with Alliance Française, and they put us in a dorm, in a gymnasium, lycée, Janson de Sailly. And on that dorm, and this is in the 16th arrondissement, the prestigious, rich part of Paris, there was the huge inscription, the graffiti, "Nous voulons jouir sans entrave." We want to enjoy without impediments, without boundaries, without obstacles. We want to enjoy boundlessly. Nous voulons jouir sans entrave. So Paris sort of greeted me in a grand way. And this was one of the very well-known slogans of the 68. And the slogans of the 68, one part of them, there was a Maoist part of the 68, the orthodox Marxist party, class struggle, etc. And that part was rather about asceticism. There's too much enjoyment around. We must make discipline in order to change this consumer society or whatever. And on the other side, there were situationists, and this was a situationist slogan. You know, situationist international and the importance it had in the 60s, in the 70s in France. Nous voulons jouir sans entrave. And here comes also maybe the first psychoanalytic lesson, which I didn't quite realize then, but a sort of Lacanian lesson or a Freudian lesson, that jouissance est une entrave, that jouissance itself, enjoyment, is an obstacle. It's not like, let's liberate enjoyment and we'll be fine. Enjoyment itself presents an obstacle. And in the discourse on sexuality, I mean, this is very broad. You know Heidegger's term Gelassenheit? The releasement, I think, is the German term. Let be. Let things be in their mysterious, precarious, whatever, presence. In relation to sexuality, there was nobody who stepped forward ever to say, let it be the way it is. So there's no Gelassenheit in sexual matters. Something has to be done with sexuality. And what can be done is roughly two things: either restrict it because it's so unruly and dangerous, or else liberate it, and then we'll be fine. And the difficult psychoanalytic lesson, Freudian lesson and Lacanian lesson, is that this alternative doesn't quite work. That after lifting the restrictions, the prohibitions, which were so heavily, such a heavy weight in the whole history, in traditional societies, and psychoanalysis did a lot to lift these taboos, to free the traditional morals, but nevertheless never quite espoused simply the slogan of liberating sexuality. There's no such thing. Freud was very skeptical about this. So this is a sort of first, let's say, Lacan 1-0, Lacan's zero level. Enjoyment is an obstacle. One doesn't enjoy the way one would want to. And this is why we have psychoanalysis. Lacan has this famous saying, ça jouit et ça ne veut rien savoir. It enjoys and doesn't want to know. It enjoys at our expense. It enjoys not the way we would want to. This is why people come to psychoanalysis. This is what is called symptom. It enjoys, but it suffocates us. So this is the first story.
Ja, und dann waren Sie aber ein zweites Mal dann länger in Paris, nämlich 1980. Ich war genau auch zu dem Zeitpunkt ein bisschen früher und dann noch länger genau an diesen Orten, die Sie frequentiert haben. Damals um 1980, in den 70er Jahren, war Paris tatsächlich die Hauptstadt, die intellektuelle Hauptstadt der Welt, kann man schon behaupten, allein wenn man die Philosophen, Soziologen, Psychoanalytiker, Linguisten betrachtet, die eben an ein paar Orten, man musste zum Teil rausfahren in die Vororte, Nanterre oder auch Saint-Denis, aber im Zentrum neben der Sorbonne war die Collège de France und gleich daneben wieder École Normale Supérieure, also das waren Leute wie Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Roland Barthes, Gilles Deleuze, und es gab wie einen intellektuellen Touristenzirkus, an dem Sie auch teilgenommen haben, oder?
Yes, very much so. When we were talking just now, preparing for this, we discovered that we were actually sitting on the same lectures in 1980 in Paris. We didn't know each other then. But I will tell the second story about my encounter with Paris, which is from 1980. In the meantime, between 1969 and 1980, in the 70s, this group was formed in Ljubljana. And we did a lot of very serious work on structuralism, on all the people that you mentioned. We were reading this very avidly. And by the end of the 70s, we somehow thought that Lacan's theory was the one which led the furthest. And this is the most interesting and the most intriguing and the most difficult part of this. So by some miracle of fortune, whatever, I thought there was this big other existing in Paris, Le Grand Autre, which was called École Freudienne de Paris, Parisian Freudian School of Paris. This is the organization that Lacan founded in 1964. It was going very strong. It was a very powerful intellectual center. It seemed to be the center of the world. And I had this idea, this would be really the place to be. And by some miracle, I somehow got the scholarship to study in Paris for 1 year. And now comes the story. I arrived in January in 1980 and opened Le Monde. Didn't even need to open it because it was à la une on the first page of Le Monde. Lacan has disbanded the school. So the first thing I saw in Paris was the front page news. Lacan has disbanded the school, la dissolution. He dissolved the school. The organization which seemed to be so successful and such a powerful intellectual center. And so this was my second Lacanian lesson. The big other doesn't exist. So you come for the big other. You see, you think finally I'll be there in the center, in this center of the world, and I come just at the moment of la dissolution. This was actually a very powerful message that he somehow didn't want to. He did this wordplay in French, l'école and la colle. La colle is the glue. So every institution becomes the glue. There's the danger of gluing. And this is why he, despite the very success of his school, he, at the height of this success, decided to dissolve it and to start anew at the age of 80. It's never too late. And this was actually the moment when I arrived in Paris, and this was the moment when psychoanalysis was front page news. And if we look through things 40 years later, whatever any psychoanalyst would do would perhaps find a place on page 32, maybe. So this is not any longer a front page news. We are speaking in a moment of a crisis of psychoanalysis and crisis of critical thought. And this is somehow the span.
Also sie kamen an und die Schule wurde von Lacan aufgelöst. Es war aber auch so, dass diese sehr verschiedenen Theorien, Philosophien von Deleuze oder Derrida in ganz unterschiedliche Richtungen auch gegangen sind. Wie haben Sie denn da einen Kompass gefunden? Also Lacan war sicherlich ein Kompass, aber er war gar nicht ansprechbar. Was war für Sie der Orientierungspunkt? Wie haben Sie es geschafft, diese doch sehr unterschiedlichen Denkrichtungen aufzunehmen, zu verarbeiten und was Neues zu machen?
Yes, well, indeed, these were very different people, and I have personal experience of all this. I listened to all these guys. I mean, I followed the courses for 1 year in 1980 in Vincennes, in Collège de France, Nanterre, École Normale Supérieure. And this was sort of obligatory. Everybody went to these lectures, and it was kind of Lacan, especially after dissolution. He was the biggest. He was a superstar. I mean, they hired the biggest lecturing hall in Paris, which holds 1,100 seats in Faculté de Droit, next to Panthéon. And you had to be there 2 hours early to get in. And in comparison, like Foucault lectured in Collège de France, which is very, very nearby, but there was a lecturing hall for 400 people, and you had to be there 1 hour early. So there was sort of measure of this popularity, or what was really in, what people really wanted to, where people really wanted to be. And Foucault, I'm sure, would have more audience if he, you said there was intellectual tourism, but Foucault spoke incredibly quickly. I mean, he was a very extremely quick speaker. You had to know French very well in order to be able to follow the whole thing. So the international audience sometimes didn't go to Foucault, but they went to Roland Barthes, who was this charming, slow, la voix, appealing to everyone. I mean, playing to the audience, knowing how to. And indeed, as we discovered, we were both on Roland Barthes' last lecture, and nobody at the time could possibly imagine that would be his last lecture. And a couple of days later, he was run over by a truck, and a couple of weeks later, he died. So that was, a sort of very fond and sad moment. I had.
Ja, das war die große Zeit des Poststrukturalismus, der Beginn der Postmoderne in der Theorie. Anything Goes. Lyotard hat ja auch nochmal die großen Erzählungen verabschiedet und sich für die kleinen, für Wittgenstein, für Sprachspiele interessiert. Aber wenn alles möglich ist, ist es natürlich für einen jungen Intellektuellen schwierig, eine Orientierung zu finden. Eine wichtige war sicherlich Jacques Derrida für sie gewesen. Er hat an der École Normale Supérieure auch mit einer also man hat ihn immer als so Irrationalist hingestellt, aber die Vorlesungen von ihm waren so klar und logisch durchdacht und streng. Und auch wie er aufgetreten ist, immer mit einem sehr schicken Hemd und hat auch Faszination durch seine Person ausgeübt und durch seine Sprachanalyse, durch das, was man dann Dekonstruktion genannt hat. Er hatte wirklich diese Gebäude, die er beschrieben hat, auseinandergenommen und wieder zusammengesetzt. Sie haben diese zentrale These von Derrida ja dann doch auseinandergenommen. Derrida hat ja sowas gehabt, so ein Modell Logozentrismus. Der Logos im Sinne vom Neuen Testament, am Anfang war das Wort, das gesprochene Wort, das würde die abendländische Philosophie begründen und uns eigentlich, wenn man es platt sagt, auch ins Verderben führen. Sie haben aber genau diese Art aufgenommen, aber weiterentwickelt. Das, denke ich, war ein wesentlicher Schritt, dass Sie über Derrida hinausgegangen sind.
Yes, well, all these people were very important for me, and I'm extremely fond of them. I mean, at the time, the spirit was more belligerent, like Lacanians versus Derridians versus Deleuzians versus Foucauldians. There were a lot of friction, and there still is. But somehow, belonging to that incredible, wonderful opening moment, enthusiastic moment, intellectual moment, I can't but feel very close to all these thinkers. I mean, this is where I come from. This moment in 1980s in Paris, with listening to all these people, this marked me, and I still persevere actually with what I thought was the great opening of that time. And well, Derrida, at the time, actually, I always followed his courses sitting on the floor. Right? I came too late. I mean, but that was normal. I mean, people were sitting on the floor, right? and people were smoking during the lectures. I mean, every time I saw Deleuze was sort of smoke screen, sort of thick smoke screen.
Mit den langen Fingernägeln.
Yes, with the long
Fingernägel geschnitten.
Yes, that's right. Okay, but there's a danger of being sort of nostalgic about that moment, and you know this expression, "Okay, boomer," you know what it means. You know the expression, "Okay, boomer."
No.
Ah, no, it's all over. I mean, it's a sort of it's what the young generation would say to listening us talk. You know, boomer, the baby boom generation. okay, boomer, we had enough. I mean, all this talk about 60s, about these wonderful moments that we missed, all these revolutions, enough. So, okay, boomer has become a sort of viral slogan of younger generations, precisely against the kind of talk that I'm holding now. the sort of, recalling the great moment. So enough about, enough of stories, let's say, and you were asking a serious, actually a very serious philosophical question, which is Derrida's, basis of Derrida's deconstruction, logocentrism, indeed, sorry. But logocentrism is not his original concept. Actually, the concept of logocentrism stems from Ludwig Klages, who was a Lebensphilosoph in the 1920s, who set up this thing that all the Western civilization is based on logos, so this is its basic disease. But Derrida's claim was stronger. I mean, the concept that he introduced, and which is kind of counterintuitive maybe, is the concept of phonocentrism. And phonocentrism says it's a much stronger claim than logocentrism. Namely, phonocentrism, what does it mean? It means phone is the voice. It means the privilege of the voice over the writing, over the trace. And you have these metaphors in every language. There is a live voice and there is the dead letter. And the dead letter sort of threatens the living presence of the live voice. And the dead letter, the writing is seen as secondary. First we speak, then at a later stage we start writing. And humanity spoke for a long time before anybody came upon the idea this could be written. And so it seems self-evident that there is the primacy of the voice, that there is phonocentrism, that the voice is a primary medium of language and communication. And furthermore, it seems evident that the voice is a proof of the living presence. The metaphysics of presence, what Derrida calls the metaphysics of presence.
Im Gegensatz zur Differenz.
Yes, im Gegensatz zur Differenz, is precisely this connection between voice and presence and even more. One very famous sentence in grammatology runs s'entendre parler, sans doute c'est cela ce qu'on appelle la conscience. To hear oneself speak, no doubt this is what we call consciousness. And it's a typical Derridian sentence. It means when we hear our own voice, we have this illusion of auto-affection, of being at the same time the emitter and the receiver of our own voice. And this is the pledge of consciousness, our self-consciousness, the pledge of our self-presence, transparency of presence, as it were. So this is Derrida's, this is the diagnosis of Western metaphysics that Derrida does through this unexpected angle of relationship between voice and writing, and trace of otherness, trace of alterity. Because the moment we write, what we write is exempt from the situation in which this was written. I mean, when we speak, we see each other, we can immediately exchange, correct ourselves or whatever. But what is written is to be used at some later point, at some later place. And what doesn't have a control over where writing will spread. And writing spreading is the whirlwind of history. We never know where it will end and in what way people will understand it. So writing is exempt from presence. This is Derrida's notion of dissemination. It always disseminates the presence. It undermines the presence.
Und Differenz als Aufschub.
Also Aufschub is precisely based on the question.
Mit A geschrieben, Differenz.
Ja, Differenz mit A geschrieben. Different, yeah, whatever. Whatever is the German.
Aufschub.
Aufschub. Ja. Differenz. No, Differenz und Differenz, maybe.
Ja.
Yes.
Aber Sie gehen ja weiter, also bei Derrida ist das eine Höherbewertung der Schrift im Gegensatz zur mündlichen Sprache. Für Derrida ist diese Möglichkeit der Differenzierung in der Schrift und die Spuren, die sie hinterlässt, auch in der Schreibweise, die er dann bei Nietzsche und so weiter untersucht hat, wesentlich, um eben sich von so dieser Allmacht der Präsenz des Gegenwärtigen zu befreien. Aber Sie gehen in eine ganz andere Richtung.
Yes, well, I have this book on the voice, which is also translated into German and in 10 different languages, actually. My thesis is that Derrida somehow sets up this opposition. I simplify things here. It's a long story. It's a story which can't be quite properly cut short. But in Derrida, you have this opposition between voice and the trace and writing and difference, which is the disrupting of the presence of the self-presence, the self-transparency of the voice. And this is for Derrida the history of metaphysics. He can trace this from Plato, from Socrates. Socrates is the one who never wrote. I mean, Socrates was the only serious philosopher in the sense that he really believed in the spoken word and the presence of the spoken word. No? Everybody else is a traitor. They started writing at some point.
Und die Offenbarung Diotima, die eben die göttliche Lehre auch mündlich übertragen bekommt, was dann eben auch in der ganzen Bibel und so weiter immer die Mündlichkeit der Stimme.
The Mündlichkeit is the presence, the pledge of presence, the proof of presence, of the living presence. And so, what I try to do in one part of my work, and it's a chapter, the book is devoted to this, is to write another kind of history of the voice, of metaphysical history of the voice, which is the voice as the voice, not the writing, but the voice as a disruptive element, as an alien disruptive element. And you can see this if you look at the ways that the Western thought treated singing and music. And you have this precept, which you find very adamantly in Plato and in Aristotle, and then in the Christian tradition, that the singing voice should follow the wording. The singing voice should stay with logos.
Sollte verständlich sein, verstanden werden.
Yes, because it needs an anchorage. Why does it need an anchorage? Because otherwise it's pure jouissance which could go in any direction. It may stem from God or the devil, the voice in itself. And the voice always had the property of being effeminate, belonging to the side of femininity. So the voice, there's a whole history to be written, and I don't have time to do this here, but which saw the voice, and particularly the feminine voice, or the feminization of the voice, and every voice is potentially feminized, as it were. As something that counteracts the phallocentrism, the logocentrism and phallocentrism, and as a disruptive element which presents a danger, which has to be kept in check. One has to impose limits to this. So this is the interesting thing, not the voice which is the pledge of presence and over which we are masters in our self-presence, self-transparency, auto-affection, etc. But the voice over which we are not masters and which disrupts this auto-affection. And if you look at psychoanalysis, the way that voice presents itself in psychoanalysis, it's always the question of a disruptive voice, of something that doesn't quite fit as an alien element. The voice is like an alien element. And the most convincing, spectacular thing is, of course, hearing voices, which is the most common symptom of psychosis. People hear voices, they suddenly start hearing voices. And these voices are intrusive. They don't have any power over them. They need serious treatment for this. So hearing voices is a very common pathology. But also, if we don't go to such lengths, the question of the voice of the superego, say, which is a common phenomenon, again, a voice in our head telling us what to do, what not to do, and also telling us not only what we should do, but also sometimes telling us to fail, not simply to succeed, but sort of perversely, there's a voice which suddenly said, no, this is the superego, no? Which is for Lacan not the moral law. It's a perversion of the moral law. And superego is always tied with a voice. Une grosse voix, says Lacan, a fat voice. It's a fat voice. No? And you have, in hysteria, there's a common pathology, which is aphonia. People lose the power, the capacity to speak. No? And so there is the mother's voice. There's a whole pathology also. There's the absolute ambiguity of the mother's voice, which is the nest and the cage. It's the nest which provides a home, but also a cage from which one cannot escape. So you have in psychoanalysis a whole panoply, a whole long list of various pathologies which are linked with the voice, which are always linked with the question of a voice which is recalcitrant and which is alien, which is not precisely the homely presence of auto-affection. And this is the kind of voice I'm interested in.
Also hat Ihnen Lacan geholfen, auch mit seiner Theorie der menschlichen Entwicklung, Derrida zu überwinden. Also dass eben das Brabbeln, diese Laute, die eigentlich gar nicht der Vernunft gehorchen, dem Logos nicht gehorchen, das Baby ausspricht, sind, so sagt es ungefähr Lacan, Signifikanten, die erst den Signifikaten herstellen, die den vorbereiten. Ich glaube, das ist so ein Punkt, der für Sie wichtig ist, eben genau dieses Brabbeln und so ernst zu nehmen.
Yes, no, this is an absolutely central point, actually. You can start with the question of babbling, as the infants do. They first babble, and it's interesting how this solidifies to a kind of language. But Lacan has this concept of la langue, written as one word, not language, but sort of how can actually English translation is language with double L, which is a sort of not a very good attempt, but you cannot translate because this is itself already a wordplay. And where does this la langue? What does it consist of? Why is it so important? On the one hand, we have the whole Saussurean tradition of the signifier based on a difference, on pure difference, and the signifier is a creature of difference. Only insofar it's different from other signifiers can it signify. No? It doesn't have an identity of its own. It's based on pure difference. But this other part, la langue, it's based on similarity. No? It's based on wordplays. No? And I'll give you just one example, which is Freud's example in the book on Fehlleistungen, Psychopathologie des Alltagslebens, and this only works in German. There was this woman speaking about her family, and she says, oh, sie sind so viel Geiz. No, ich wollte sagen Geist. So you can see the fact that Geiz and Geist are so close in German made this slip possible. And this proximity, this completely contingent proximity, made it possible for her to express what she really thinks about her family. And one could propose, I don't know, actually I've written about this a bit, but one could propose Phänomenologie des Geizes, you know, as a project, you know. and you can see Geist, Geiz. It's very interesting because they're so close by listening to it, but actually they are supposed to denote two things which are maximally opposed. Because Geiz is the petty thing, grabbing for oneself, selfishly. Whereas Geist should be the elevation above the worldly matters. No? And so those two things are brought together in a sort of short circuit. No? And the point I'm trying to get to, this is a pun. This is what in English is called a pun. No? In German, I don't know if you have, there's a word Kalauer.
Kalauer, yeah.
Kalauer, which is something, okay, similar, not quite okay. Le calembour in French. Why is it so important? Because
Wortspiel, oder?
Yeah, Wortspiel, and generally Wortspiel, or more generally homonymy. Homonymy, as opposed to synonymy. Synonymy, different words mean the same thing. Homonymy, words sound alike, although they mean very different things. And the simple point I'm trying to get to is no unconscious without homonymy, no unconscious without punning. And this is why I gave this Freudian example, but all other examples you can see, so many examples in psychoanalysis you can see, depend precisely on words contingently sounding alike. This is why you can make a rapprochement of very different meanings, very disparate areas by complete contingency. So the very existence of the unconscious actually uses these contingencies of a language. And this is why the unconscious is not is particular to every language, because it uses the particular materiality, the sound values of different languages. It's not translatable. And so this Geist thing, it only works in German. It cannot be explained in any other language.
Genau. Bei Übersetzern, Traditore ist zum Beispiel, Wortspiele sind unübersetzbar. Was aber die Sprache auch bei Lacan ausmacht, er sagt, die Sprache verfehlt die Wirklichkeit. Und dieses Verfehlen steht eigentlich auch immer wieder im Zentrum ihrer Beobachtungen und Analysen, dass eben so eine Gleichung nicht aufgeht, dass es auf die Spaltungen, auf den Spalt ankommt, auf diese Brüche, die eigentlich den Menschen ausmachen.
Yes, Verfehlung is one way of looking at it. Lacan uses the rencontre manquée, the missed encounter, the missed encounter. And so the story I was telling before about my coming to Paris and Lacan disbanding the school, this was very much in line with the Lacanian theory. There was a missed encounter. The encounter has to be missed if it's to be a proper psychoanalytic thing. But in the very missing, something is produced. This is the important thing. There is a side product always in.
Eine frühe Maxime von Jacques Lacan war dieser Satz "Ne pas céder sur le désir". Das hat er später etwas zurückgenommen. Nicht vom Begehren ablassen. Das hat für Sie auch eine politische Bedeutung, oder?
Yes. Yes, well, in the Seminar on Ethics of Psychoanalysis, which is a seminar he held in 1959-60, I believe, he proposed this, Lacan proposed this, ne pas céder sur son désir, as the guideline of psychoanalytic ethics. What does it mean? Not to give way as to one's desire. No? Desire is a certain force of negativity. No? And psychoanalysis started with the analysis of hysteria. Hysteria is, as it were, the disease of desire. And also the subversive part of hysteria is precisely this, a desire which doesn't want to compromise. Whatever object you offer to this desire, whatever object is presented, it always says, c'est pas ça. It's not it. This is not it. This is not. The desire is more than any object of satisfaction that is presented to it. There is this negativity of desire over the objects. The question of not compromising with any particular solution, any part solution, but always wanting to go further, always having this negativity, pursuing this negativity as the innermost triebfeder. And of course, this ne pas céder sur son désir, there are dangers to this slogan. I mean, one danger is, and Lacan, I mean, this subversive part of hysteria, and due to this subversive part, psychoanalysis could be invented at all as a subversive practice. But there is also, let's say, a questionable part of hysteria, namely the desire that doesn't, the unsatisfiable desire which is cannot be satisfied with any partial object of satisfaction. I mean, it somehow needs the dirty world around in order to affirm itself as the pure desire. And this is where Lacan actually translates this into the Hegel's criticism of die schöne Seele, the beautiful soul. The beautiful soul is the highly moral soul, but which needs the dirty world, the dirt of the world around it, in order to prove its own purity. So this is the questionable part. That somehow you rely on the world being dirty, in order to present yourself as the hero of pure desire. And also there is a sort of something what Freud at some point calls the narcissism of the lost cause. I stand up for this lost cause, and I like myself in this position of a defender of the lost cause. I know that the cause is lost, but it's so great. It's so gratifying. The gratifying image I can make of myself and the other people who have of me, of standing up for lost causes. So this is why this ne pas céder sur son désir, not to give way as to one's desire, it's also dangerous. It has there are deviations of this. There are dangers which can largely go into what Hegel described as the dialectics of the beautiful soul.
Ja, da kommen wir genau eigentlich zu dem Punkt, der sie dann doch nochmals von Derrida und auch von Deleuze, Foucault unterscheidet, dass sie sehr früh sich mit Hegel beschäftigt haben und diese Kraft der Negativität, der Negation, was ja den Kern der Dialektik ausmacht, immer wieder weitergetrieben haben, untersucht haben. Es gibt ja die schöne Anekdote von Slavoj Zizek, der Hegel zu Hegel kam, weil er beim Militär immer Wache schieben musste und so viel Zeit hatte, und dann konnte er die Logik lesen, und die Logik, wer es mal versucht hat, braucht Jahre, um sie zu verstehen.
Ja, die Eule der Minerva.
Genau, ja, die Nacht, erst in der Nacht kommt die Erkenntnis, die Weisheit, und Nachtwachen musste er eben schieben. Wie sind Sie denn zu Hegel gekommen und was ist der Kern Ihrer Hegel-Lektüre? Eigentlich macht es ja auch den Kern der Ljubljana School aus.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry, I forgot actually to print out. It would have been nice to give a Brecht quote on Hegel, but which goes roughly like this: that Hegel is the biggest humorist in the history of philosophy. And you can appreciate his humor because he's winking all the time. No, he's making this
Zwinkern.
Yeah, he all the time he's winking. I mean, he's saying this, but he also sort of makes this gesture. You know that this is what he's saying, and this maybe is not what he's saying. And you have this description. I mean, the Brecht quote is brilliant. I can't reproduce it really well, but he says, Die Logik, it's a great book. It's about the sleazy existence of concepts which go at each other with knives and then sit at the dinner table as if nothing happens. And he says, politics was also one of his great jokes, because the biggest revolutionaries count themselves as the pupils of the biggest defender of the state. And Karl Marx was, he was a
Robespierre.
And Robespierre, no. He was not a Hegelian. It was before the time, but Karl Marx was the one who, Hegel, the defender of the Prussian state, all the things. So there is this connection. Yes, and one further thing he says is that his humor was such that he saw disorder in the very vicinity of the order, actually at the very same place. So that things can be seen from the point of identity or from the point of dissolution, disruption, at any point, at every point. So how did I come to Hegel? This is just, the Brecht quote is so nice because it shows this ambiguity of Hegel. Ambiguity of Hegel, which has his conservative side, and there was a lot of conservative Hegelianism. And
wir sagen Rechtshegelianer und Linkshegelianer.
It was already after
Rechtshegelianer, die eben den Staat verteidigen, und Linkshegelianer, die Herr und Knecht gelesen haben, auf Herr und Knecht insistieren und auf diese revolutionäre, unabschließbare Dialektik insistieren, was ja selbst die Logik endet nicht mit einem Schluss, sondern so wird es weitergehen. Das ist zwischen Sein und Nichts. Es gibt kein absolutes Nichts und ein absolutes Sein, sondern ein Verschwinden und ein Entstehen und Vergehen im Grunde genommen.
They are actually the same thing.
Und das sind die Linkshegelianer, während die Rechtshegelianer sich auf wir brauchen den Staat und wir brauchen die Regeln.
Yes, Hegel, der Verteidiger
des preußischen
order,
Staates,
and Hegel, the revolutionary. There are two sides to Hegel. At every point, there are two sides to Hegel. But how did we come to Hegel? I mean, what is the particular entry point also of the Ljubljana school or whatever? And I think we'll later come to this. Since we're in Frankfurt, we cannot but speak about the Frankfurt School somehow. And the Frankfurt School was extremely important for my intellectual formation, for Zizek's, for the whole school. Because at the time, and this is just a very brief reminder that Yugoslavia was not a socialist country like others. I mean, very different from Romania or Russia or whatever. It was a very particular kind of socialism, and which stemmed from Tito splitting with Stalin after the Second World War. So Yugoslavia had this own way to socialism, as it was called at the time, which means a non-Stalinist Marxism was the official somehow ideology. And when I was studying philosophy in Ljubljana, the non-Stalinist Marxism, which was around and which was the strongest thing around, was the Frankfurt School. So my professors were basically, they were reading and teaching Adorno, Horkheimer, Zonnerettel then in the 70s. I mean, and these were people, Marcuse, these were people who actually also came to Korčula. There was a Korčula summer school in the late 60s, and everybody came.
Dubrovnik.
It's an island on the Dalmatian coast, and everybody came to Korčula. Marcuse came, Ernst Bloch came, Angela Davis came, Henri Lefebvre came, not Adorno though. Zonnerettel came. So it seemed to be the platform for a non-Stalinist leftist thought. It seemed to present this platform for a certain period of time. Then it ended in various ways, but for us this was very important. The theory on which we were raised philosophically officially from our professors was actually Frankfurt School, largely taken notion of Frankfurt School, and there was the absolute centrality of engagement with Hegel in the Frankfurt School. This was the one extremely important thing for us, despite all the criticism. The fact that one has to engage with Hegel, that there is the essential line of reference is taking a stand on Hegel as the last metaphysician, as it were. That this is something one has to engage with. And this was very different from the French structuralism, because most of the French structuralism actually were Hegel haters, Hegel bashers. You know, you have the famous Deleuze line, oubliez Hegel, forget Hegel. No? Not criticize him or supersede him or analyze him or whatever. You will get bogged down in this marsh.
Als Meisterdenker.
Yeah, he's Meisterdenker, one of the Meisterdenkers. Hegel, Husserl, Heidegger, the three ages, etc., etc. There was this talk. So you had this. One should forget that this catastrophe Hegel ever happened. This is Deleuze, who was the most adamant of those, and he was a Nietzschean. But you have the same thing in Althusser. You have the same thing in Derrida. I mean, the whole book Glas, his most difficult and the biggest book in some sense, greatest book, is a long and very sustained criticism of Hegel. How to get rid of the Hegelian thing. And for us, we were regarding Hegel, we were rather on the side of the Frankfurt School. Engaging with Hegelian legacy is essential. One has to hold on to it. There's no way of getting rid of it. And Hegelian legacy, Hegel is precisely the watershed between metaphysics, he's the last metaphysician, and the first modern thinker. One has to go back to this watershed, the end of metaphysics, or the sort of, the boundary of metaphysics, as it were, and the beginning, the opening up of any modern thought. And this is where Hegel is absolutely important.
Höhepunkt der Frankfurter Buchmesse wird nach meinem Geschmack sein, wenn die Ljubljana School auf die Frankfurter Schule trifft. Es wird am Freitag der Buchmesse stattfinden. Was denken Sie, wer gewinnt? Wie wollen Sie die Frankfurter
Wer gewinnt?
Wie wollen Sie die Frankfurter schlagen? Welche schlagenden Argumente haben Sie?
No, first of all, it's I don't know how we landed in this place to be sort of pitched against the Frankfurt School. No? The Frankfurt School, which at no point I saw the Frankfurt School as my opponent. Let's say we learned a lot from the Frankfurt School. We took a different path on so many questions. There's a serious criticism of certain Frankfurt School lines, but I am profoundly indebted to the Frankfurt School. I have a profound respect, and one person I was seriously influenced by was Adorno in my younger days. And I think Adorno, in some ways, comes close to Lacan in certain ways. Can be read together. Now you say wer gewinnt, and I will say I don't know how to put it. I don't believe much in dialogue. I mean, I don't believe. I don't believe in. Let me specify in dialogue such as they usually happen. And I think most dialogues fall into two categories. One category is the dialogue of the deaf, which is like everybody pursues their own monologues and says, my esteemed colleague said this is very important. Then they continue and nobody is actually affected what other people said, and everything finishes in very amiable atmosphere of sort of quasi-consensus or something, but actually nobody listened to the other. This is very common. And the other kind of dialogue is the cutthroat dialogue. who will win? Who will humiliate whom? Who will get the upper hand? Who will emerge as the victor of this battle? And everybody entrenches themselves all the more. The more the battle continues, everybody entrenches themselves. And the issue is far more the narcissistic issue of winning than actually the dealing with the thing itself. And so if I don't believe in those two types of dialogue, I don't think they are very productive. I have a certain belief in a third type of dialogue, which is there's a very common game. There are people on the beach. There's a circle of people on the beach who take a ball and they pass the ball to each other. And this is a collaborative game because the point of the game is that keep the ball in the air. The ball shouldn't fall. So you do whatever things and help each other to keep the ball in the air. This is how I see a dialogue. Keep the ball in the air. Keep the ball in the air. Somebody says something and then just don't worry about who wins. I mean, let's just try out the ideas. Let's try out crazy ideas, even if we know that this cannot be quite taken seriously. But let's try it out, even if it's not properly backed, academically backed or whatever. Let's try out dangerous things. Let's experiment with thought. But let's do it as people do with this ball, keeping it in the air, which means in a friendly atmosphere, we are collectively thinking. We are thinking collectively. We are collectively trying to produce something new. This would be my type of dialogue. I would wish that the dialogue with the Frankfurt School of that kind. Keep the ball in the air, try out new ideas, try experiment, try to engage whatever I don't know if there are really two opposed sides in this thing. Whatever each of us thinks of the other, I mean, it's less important than producing this, trying out the ideas in the company of others. Because thought is a collective thing. It's not, it's both a very solitary thing. You have to sit down in your little room and deal with a lot of very difficult texts, the most difficult texts that were produced in the Western civilization, and write these things. But this is not enough. I mean, this is not enough. The image of the solitary thinker. It's always a collective thing. Man has to think together with others.
Aber Sie weichen aus. Es gibt ja doch, gerade von Adorno, falsche Versöhnung. Was Sie jetzt gerade skizzieren, finde ich, ist eine falsche Versöhnung. Sie haben doch Trümpfe. Sie haben doch was den Frankfurtern fehlt, ist genau vielleicht der Unterschied zwischen, sagen wir, Camus und Sartre. Was das Begehren, was die Triebschicksale, was das Individuelle, was das Subversive ausmacht. Klar gibt es in Frankfurt die Sigmund Freud Institut, aber genau die haben eben, die sind jetzt auf Biologie, auf Naturwissenschaften aus, und was mal so jemand wie Mitscherlich war, die auch eine Theorie der Psychoanalyse weiterführen wollten, die gibt es ja kaum noch. Aber das ist doch eigentlich eine Stärke, die sie gegenüber diesen doch eher, würde ich mal sagen, so auf Anerkennung und auch auf Versöhnung ausgehenden Frankfurtern haben. Sie haben doch eher das Subversive. Warum betonen Sie das nicht?
Yes. I agree. You were asking who wins, who will win in this. And I don't believe in dialogues where people are trying to win or somehow humiliate the other. No? I think there should be this collective spirit, that we should come to something new, and this is not Versöhnung. We don't need to agree. We don't need to agree. We just try things out. But I agree, of course, that there's this question of Anerkennung, which is quite central.
Axel Honneth, yeah.
Yes, Axel Honneth and so many others. I mean, the certain reading of Hegel goes very much in the direction of Anerkennung. And there is a question of, it's a difficult topic to breach at this late point. But let's say the topic of alienation. of alienation. There is a great difference. I mean, there is a difference that in the Frankfurt, I'm simplifying. I'm really simplifying. In the Frankfurt tradition, there is a basic idea that alienation is something to be superseded. It's a bad thing. We live in an alienated society. We are alienated from ourselves, from our products, and we need to overcome alienation. That being alien is bad. There is this idea in Lacan that alienation is constitutive. That there is a kind of alienation that we can't be rid of. I mean, we would lose being human if we were rid of this. And you have this idea. If you look at the the early Habermas, Erkenntnis und Interesse, Erkenntnis und Interesse, which is a book largely with a lot of talk about psychoanalysis, but his idea of psychoanalysis is that the unconscious, I'm really simplifying, that the unconscious is this alien kernel which we must appropriate in order to be ourselves. Lacan's idea is the alien kernel is the most precious part of ourselves. Precisely, it's alien, it's being alien. And this is where Lacan has this great word, comes from Freud. The word is extimate. Extimate. And this is his proposal for the translation of das Unheimliche. Das Unheimliche, which is, this ambiguous Freudian word. This is something which is Heim, which is the closest, which is the home.
Heimlich.
And heimlich, and therefore dangerous. Unheimlich, and therefore horror, provoking fear. And you see, Freud says his definition of das Unheimliche is precisely something terrible, but which is terrible because it's the closest to us. It's precisely the fact that it's intimate. It makes it terrible. And extimate is a word which is translatable in so many languages. It tries to capture precisely this, the intimate kernel, which is at the same time external, which is intimate and alien at the same time, and which is not to be abolished, but somehow pursued. It's a kernel which contains a certain grain of truth, of a certain errant truth, a truth which cannot be quite mastered or put in the form of S equals P, the form of a logical proposal or something. But there is a truth. There is a truth in the unconscious. There's a moment of truth in the unconscious that has to be pursued. It's not, the unconscious is not simply the fact of alienation, which would have to be reappropriated, done away with. I mean, the ideal society in this Frankfurt view would be the society without unconscious that wouldn't need psychoanalysis. So we need only psychoanalysis in order to work towards a society which wouldn't need psychoanalysis.
Vielleicht kann man das so zusammenfassen. Die Frankfurter Schule strebt nach Harmonie, nach Heimlichem, nach einem Endzustand, nach einer erlösten Gesellschaft, während Sie gerade den Spalt, es wird immer einen Spalt geben, es wird immer einen Fehler geben, und gerade das ist die Kraft, die den Menschen ausmacht. Der Spalt soll nicht überwunden werden, sondern behauptet werden.
Yes. I agree with this last part of what you said. The Spalt is constitutive, and we have to work with this Spalt. It cannot be made whole. But I have some just a comment on the first part where you said that, and this is where I think Adorno comes close to Lacan, because Adorno was the one who didn't quite follow this script. And if you look at the Syrische Theorie, he has this, the Vorrang des Subjektes, the Vorrang des Subjektes, the precedence, the precedence of the object, Vorrang. That what makes a certain aesthetic experience authentic is precisely that there is something alien in this object that you cannot appropriate. You have to step outside of yourself. The Vorrang des Subjektes means precisely that there is an object that cannot be self-reflexively appropriated, reappropriated. And this is what makes its aesthetic
Negative
value.
dialectic.
Yes, this is negative dialectic follows from there. And the modernism, the project of modernist art, which is precisely an art which is not healing and beautiful, but which is an art of disruption.
Genau. Ich mache hier einen kleinen Bruch und möchte Sie bitten, Ihre Fragen oder Ihre Meinung oder Ihren Beitrag zu leisten. Wir haben ein Mikrofon und eine Helferin. Wer etwas sagen will, wir können hier oben sehr schwer erkennen, weil wir hier geblendet werden von der Anwesenheit von so vielen interessierten, aufmerksamen Menschen. Johannan, aber, ach so, ich dachte, Johannan wollte was sagen. Ja. Das ist sicherlich schwierig jetzt. Ah ja, hier. Der Herr.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting, very inspiring. Let's get back to the voice. And in marketing, in the media industry, everybody talking about conversational term. Because now the digital world is based on typing and reading. And maybe in the future it will be based on voice control, smart speakers like Alexa, talking instead of typing, listening. So what are the philosophical consequences if the voice becomes our tool to get access to the digital world?
Yes, well, there's actually a technical term has been invented, which is called secondary orality. Secondary orality, which means after we mastered all these gadgets, whatever, what remains is a secondary orality. It's an oral culture, and this is why I've written this text on rumors, which is the small booklet, which is now out in German. The orality of rumors. No, the rumors are always oral somehow, even if they are written down. What is Facebook? Is this a written medium? Twitter? Okay, it's written, but you can see that all the new media have this mixture. The written text becomes less and less important, as it were. And there's an overflow of images, and there's an overflow of this secondary orality, which forms communities on the basis of, well, spreading rumors. So the difference between rumor and information is collapsing. The difference between verified and unverified is collapsing. The difference between decent and indecent is collapsing. And the very difference between public and private is collapsing. And this is one of the most worrisome developments of the last years, that a lot of political discourse, a lot of political action space, whatever, has moved to the social media, to a handful of privately owned platforms which are based on undisclosed algorithms. I find this extremely troubling. And I think all these developments, the question of orality, the question of spreading, the instant enormous spreading of rumors, the possibility of this, the growing incapacity to distinguish between rumor and information, between knowledge and opinion. I think it's hard, it's difficult to be optimist, but I try.
Ja, da ist noch ein Herr oder eine Dame. Ja.
Hello, I work on my first question about the ethic of psychoanalysis.
About?
Ethic of psychoanalysis.
Yes.
On Lacan, because I don't really understand the concept, because why Ljubljana not going to Hegel with his Pflicht and Wissen dialectic and stick on by this on the ethic of psychoanalysis? Because I don't understand the concept. It sounds like more like Kant, like Pflicht and the Triebfeder.
Like Pflicht.
Yeah.
Ne pas céder sur son désir sounds like Pflicht.
Yeah,
This is what you're saying.
The ethic. It sounds like Kant's Pflicht, more like Kant's Pflicht. And Hegel criticized Kant and say, no, it's actually about Gewissen. So he got the dialectic of Pflicht and Gewissen.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I understand of phenomenology.
Mm-hmm. No, well, this question of the ethics of desire and ne pas céder sur son désir, it actually does stem from Hegel. I know there's a whole Hegelian criticism of Kant, but the one important thing for somehow following Lacan for us was that he was one of the very few within this French structuralism who held very closely to Hegel. And this was due to Kojève, to him following Kojève's lectures in the 1930s. These Kojève's lectures, were electrifying. Sartre was there, Simone de Beauvoir was there, Bataille was there, Raymond Queneau, Raymond Aron. Half of the intellectual elite of France of the next 50 years, including Lacan, was sitting on Kojève's lectures. And Kojève's lectures were the lectures on the phenomenology of spirit, and particularly on Herr und Knecht. And the way that Kojève read it, it all hinges on the question of desire. This kind of negativity of desire, which cannot find its satisfaction, is a Kojèvian idea. It's a Kojèvian idea. And what Lacan did, and this was one of his, inventions, instant inventions, is to read Hegel's notion of Begierde together with the Freudian notion of Wunsch, which stem from a completely different background. They have a different conceptual genealogy, but somehow Lacan saw the immediate connection between the two. And in Kojève you have this, the ethics of a desire which cannot be satisfied with any particular object, and this is why the only object which is can be measured at the measure of the desire is another desire. The only object of desire is another desire. And this is where Kojève says the history is the history of desires. And this is what makes then the Herr und Knecht scenario so difficult. But the question of what Lacan had in mind is actually the Hegelian notion of Begierde. Yes.
Bitte, ja?
My question is, what you do in your cultural analysis? Would you say, when you make analysis of movies, of cultural industry, would you say this is completely in the historical immanence of the commodity form, or would you say at the same time, no, there is a transcendent moment? Because when you talk about desire, you talk in a certain way very abstract, so it's not our desire. As participants on a late capitalism, it is the desire of us as human beings in a way. So is there not a tension? Derrida sometimes talks about quasi-transcendental, that he says there is a transcendental structures, and as philosophers we have to understand transcendental structures, internal to our language, but there is also a historical condition in the immanence of our social practice. So how would you deal with this? Would you say, when you make an analysis of what desire is, there is a transcendence over our capitalist inheritance, or would you say, no, this is in the immanence of our cultural practice, or is it both? I mean, Alenka Topandl sometimes speaks about the immanent transcendence, like Jürgen Habermas also in Fantasien und Geltungsrecht. There is a transcendence of our moral justifications, but it has to, in a certain way, it has to be embedded in our institutional practice. So it's both. It's an immanence, but there's also a transcendence. So would you say you do this also? I was wondering when I read all these books from Slavoj Zizek, he talks so much about Hollywood movies, about cultural industry, but then sometimes he talks about something which is transcendent to this structure. So how is the relation between the transcendental analysis of our desire and of the way in which it shows up in our late modern capitalist world?
No, well, I mean, a brief answer at this late hour would be that I would agree with what you proposed yourself, that there's an edge, a dividing line between immanence and transcendence. That, of course, we live in a commodity universe, and the universe, I mean, Marx's analysis of commodity form is his major ontological claim. No? The fact that we cannot escape that the being is presented to us in the commodity form, after the advent of capitalism, and we cannot quite escape this cage, which also means that the desire, commodity. You know Wolfgang Fritz Haug, the Waren aesthetic. I think it's a very interesting book, but he speaks precisely about this, how every commodity has to be sold in the market, and in order to be sold in the market, it has to produce desire, not need. Not need. Now, need is something more material and practical and circumscribable. It has to produce desire which is infinite. Because need can be satisfied, desire cannot be. So it's a manipulation of desire which as transcendent, which is inscribed in this immanence of commodity fetishism. And yes, where the hell is the possibility of getting out of it? There's of course also a big danger of seeing this commodity universe as completely enclosed totalitarian thing which cannot be transcended, and any attempts of transcending capitalism have so far produced more capitalism. This is really a miraculous thing with capitalism. Every disruption or every transcendence or whatever can be reinscribed back into the commodity form and the circulation of the commodity universe, circulation of a capital. But nevertheless, we have to cling on to the let's say, the ambiguous nature of this. This is not lückenlose universe which presents a cage from which we cannot escape. It's self-contradictory in so many ways. And these contradictions have to be pursued and sought out. And what Slavoj is doing also sometimes with Hollywood movies or whatever is to point to why these movies address a certain contradiction, valid contradiction, and give it a bad twist or whatever, or go in the wrong direction. But why is there a valid problem which they address, and why, therefore, can they draw large audiences? And one has to work with that. Not simply say, and this was really the weak point of Adorno, of saying popular culture is culture industry. We don't want any of this. We belong to the high modernism. Schoenberg, whoever doesn't understand Schoenberg or Beckett is not is sort of half human. Everybody else is being blinded by the culture industry, and he was really. I mean, this is the problematic side of Adorno, highly problematic side.
Ja, ich denke, hier oben sind auch verblendet durch diese Lampen und wir wollen der totalen Verblendung entgehen und ich möchte Sie jetzt bitten, dass wir das dann im kleineren Kreis fortführen. Mladen Dolar ist gerade aus Ljubljana angekommen und ein bisschen müde und ich denke 1,5 Stunden sind auch fast 1,5 Stunden erfordern viel Geduld. Ich habe gespürt, die Aufmerksamkeit ist sehr, sehr groß. Man müsste noch wirklich weiter diskutieren, aber immerhin denke ich schon, hat auch Mladen Dolar einen Ausweg gefunden, dass man sich von der totalen Verblendung auch nicht verblenden lassen sollte. Und suchen sollte irgendwo den Spalt finden. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit, vielen Dank für die Unterstützung von Slowenien, vielen Dank Mladen Dolar.